Welcome back to the Spector Creative channel. I'm your host, Scott Toy Guru Netlich, and I've gotten in trouble in the past for noting that He-Man's power sword is the most famous fantasy sword of all time, and obviously people have brought up lots of other examples, although I still maintain some of them may not be as widely known as we toy fans think. But I can say that Castle Grayskull is the most widely recognized fantasy castle of all time, and I dare anyone to come up with a better example that's more well known in pop culture. Well, no, that doesn't count. That's in a theme park. I'm talking about a playset, like a toy castle. All right, no Hogwarts, no Minas Tirith. We're talking about playset castles. How about that? All right, Castle Grayskull. The greatest castle playset of all time. Comes with everything you see here. It was the inspiration for so much of our play as children, and it really was an avatar for our imagination. And it really did come with everything you sort of see here. Okay, well, there was something you see here that it didn't come up with, and that's what the story of this video is. All right, let's take a quick look at what Castle Grayskull did include in the final version. Of course, you had the real, quote-unquote, working elevator. Well, I mean, you could push it up with your hand. And, of course, there was the drawbridge and the weapons rack and the ladder of awesomeness and the training device, which, was really cool. Probably the most well-known feature was the trap door and the throne that when you swiveled it, the door would open and send characters tumbling down. Pundling's not a word, Scott. I also really enjoyed the flag and the blaster at top. The flag was originally supposed to be who owned the castle because that was part of the original play pattern. But of all the features in the castle, one of the things that really caught the imagination of so many kids wasn't even one of the plastic parts, and it wasn't really even one of the action features of the castle, like the trapdoor and the drawbridge. It was the sticker sheet. And not just any sticker on the sticker sheet, because there were quite a few, but one in particular, which is probably one of the most famous toy stickers of all time. And if you hadn't figured it out by now, or looked at the thumbnail for this video, I'm talking about the Castle Grayskull Dungeon Grate sticker, which has a really interesting story. So part of it is because it symbolizes, what's underneath, what's below, what's, down the stairs at the bottom of Castle Grayskull, which of course everybody wants to know, since even in Filmation this seemed to be the source of He-Man's power and what Skeletor wanted to get to. When Axel and I did the map or diagram of Castle Grayskull for Classics, we really made sure to pay homage to the grate, the dungeon grate, and show where all these monsters were coming from, kind of an interdimensional portal that was under there. And the grate itself has really gone beyond just the playset. It has become part of pop culture, so much that it's a recognizable sticker symbol that can be used on consumer products. You'll find it on things like t-shirts, or even a rug that Super 7 did, which I think is amazing, and I really have to order that for my office. It also pops up as homages in other toys, like this Imaginext castle that was put out about 15 years ago. Don't look too closely, or do look too closely, but the dungeon grate battery cover for the set is a recreation of the Castle Grayskull dungeon, but sculpted instead of just being a sticker, because the Imaginext fans, or rather creators, were huge fans. And there is no lack of instructions online for how to create your own 3D Castle Grayskull dungeon grate, or to buy one that someone has custom made for you. Because this sticker was it was so cool. You had all these like alien monsters. It was like the cantina from Star Wars in a dungeon. All these weird things, these outworldly, Cthulhu-esque, Lovecraftian, that's a word, right? Lovecraftian creatures that are trying to, crawl their way out of this dungeon, that there has been no small lack of fan customs over the years. Some people adding their own creatures, like this claw monster here, who wasn't in the original sticker. But hey, why not add your own characters if you're doing a custom grate? Because if you are talented enough to do this, which I am not, let's be clear about that. My customization skills are really subpar. I'm always absolutely in awe of people like Juan Soto who can do great customs. I mean, heck, even Mattel finally came out with a 3D grate for Origins with the PowerCon exclusives, with kind of the tentacle tree monster there. When we did Castle Grayskull in Classics, which was meant to kind of be the ultimate version, of course we wanted to include the dungeon grate because of how beloved it is and how much play it inspired. And on the original diagram, yes, 100%, you can see it as a 3D element that we intended to do. And it was sculpted and painted by the Four Horsemen. The problem was, by the time we got to costing, we found that the dungeon grate itself cost as much as a 6-inch figure because of all the deco that was needed. And while it was really cool to have the grate as a actual 3D element, which was the intent, it was just not affordable, and it would have bumped up the cost of the playset significantly. And since we'd already pre-sold it in at a price point, unlike HasLab, we didn't need the money up front, which we probably should have, but that's a whole other video. The point is, it did exist, and we did intend to sell it as a one-off piece, but what the new team kind of took over never followed up with this one, so unfortunately never got made. All right, so to learn about the history of the dungeon grate, we have to look at the history of Castle Grayskull itself and the origins and original sketches that were done that led to the creation of the greatest castle playset of all time. How it went from that sketch to basically this sketch. And there were a lot of steps along the way. Mark Taylor is absolutely the originator of the design. He did multiple versions of the castle, and this one, which he called the Dwell of Souls, was the first. It showed some Vikings attacking the castle by water, since it was going to be surrounded by a moat. Put a pin in that, because that's going to come up later. This version has also been called Skull Castle by the fans, and it has gone on to actually garner a place in toy history itself, having fans do artwork and box art as if it really was a toy, and even sculpting up 3D versions of Mark Taylor's original designs that could sort of be mini playsets into themselves to see like what it could look like had Skull Castle or the Dwell of Souls been actually, the way Castle Grayskull looked. The second version was a little bit more vertical and no moat this time, but again, put a pin in that because that's going to be important in a few minutes. But still you had the skull motif surrounded by castle elements that made it more than just, a demonic cave, but it really created it to be a castle. So, eventually, the final design of the castle was sculpted, again by Mark Taylor, and this is what it looked like, noting the moat that goes around it. There were some differences between that and the final version that shipped, notably how long the jaw was, or rather, protruding out, the shelf on the ledge that was to the right of the jaw bridge, as well as the pawn that was on top of the crown. A lot of these elements had to be removed from the final toy in 1982 simply for cost reasons. It was just going to be way too expensive, and it had to be shrunk down to fit into the box. But the original design, or at least the final design that became the castle, not counting the prototype designs you just saw, did live on in Masters of the Universe Legacy, notably in a lot of the early artwork. Because all of the early artwork was based on the designs, not the final toy, because it's done a year to 2 years before the toys ship. There's a long development process. So as an example, in the original mini-comics that shipped in 1984, the 4 issues, the ones without Zodak, because he hadn't been created yet either, well, all of the illustrations are based on early artwork, noting the way the sword is done, the way the throne is done, the way even Skeletor is drawn and Beastman. And while it shows off a lot of the features of the castle, there are some notable differences between the artwork and the final toy. Again, because they were all based on early concept sketches, not product. And another way that the original version lived on was in the Classics line, because as noted earlier, we based the Classics castle, the toy, this one here, which is still my favorite toy of all time, and such an honor to have gotten to work on. This was based on Mark Taylor's original sculpted version. So you see things like the ledge, and it has the pawn on top of the crown, and the elongated jaw that's coming out more. So we really wanted to bring that back to give you the castle you never had. All right, so enough about the castle itself. Let's get back to the Dungeon Grate sticker and why this is so important and the history behind it, because it's really fascinating. So we've looked at all of the early art that Mark Taylor created and how that led to the original prototype. And again, you'll notice that the prototype has a moat around it, much like the first sketch with the Vikings attacking via moat. Well, this moat was not just not like a large playmat, but in Mark Taylor's mind, it was meant to be really the focus of the play, as opposed to the flag, which that's a whole other video. So the reason that Castle Grayskull sits on this Stygian moat, or what's also sometimes called the Dwell of Souls, named after the original concept of the name that he gave the castle before Don Glut changed the name to Castle Grayskull, naming it after his now ex-girlfriend. But I guess Dwell of Souls lives on in the name of the moat. So the moat that was meant to be a flat piece of cardboard that would slide under the castle. And this was where sort of all of the adventures would come from. It was a portal to a Lovecraftian world where crazy monsters and dimension-hopping beings could all come from, and was essentially an unlimited portal of adventure where people could go in, people could come out, but it constantly was the source of all of the adventure and all the adversaries and allies and everything. And it would have added a lot to the fun, and it would have kind of looked like this, with some fans creating a custom version based on the original artwork. You can see the original way Mark Taylor intended the castle to sit on top of the Dwell of Souls moat, which would have allowed, that actually was how the drawbridge would have worked, because the drawbridge was what allowed you to cross the moat and not fall in and get swallowed up by all of these giant tentacle monsters and aliens and interdimensional beings that were coming through this portal, this horrible thing that swirled around Castle Grayskull. And this was way before the idea of the sorceress and He-Man getting his power from the castle, because the original play pattern, for those of you who've seen the other video, was about capturing the castle and switching the flag around from good to bad, depending on who owned the castle. It was like a giant game of medieval capture the flag. But before even that, it was about avoid the moat, and that Monsters Unlimited could essentially pour out of it to become adversaries for He-Man, for Skeletor, or for anyone who, was having a Masters of the Universe adventure. So obviously the castle got scaled down, as this was the final production we all got, but we never knew about what was intended when we were kids. We were just so excited to get this. The idea that we were missing out on the moat playmat was something a lot of us weren't even aware of probably till you've even seen this video, or for the fans who have been going to PowerCon and learned about this a couple of years ago. So it might come as a surprise at how important this moat was. And when it was cut, that's where the dungeon sticker comes from. So because the moat was cut, and this was such an important thing to Mark Taylor, the whole moat was shrunk down and turned into a sticker for a dungeon. And that is where the sticker comes from. It is a minimized version of the original play pattern that was meant to be a big part of the toy. But when the playmat was cut, and the pawn was cut, and the ledge was cut, Mark Taylor still wanted his Dwell of Souls in the castle, and that is why he redesigned the moat into a sticker that could be placed inside the dungeon. I hope this video was insightful and added some Masters of the Universe history. Do check out the hundreds of videos on this channel on similar subjects. You won't regret it. Share, comment, follow, subscribe, all that stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Toy Guru out.